Just one Advil is as effective as 2 regular-strength Tylenol.
For a special Advil coupon in Sunday's paper.
Do it now.
This is Aldous Huxley, a man haunted by a vision of hell on earth. A searing social critic, Mr. Huxley, 27 years ago, wrote Brave New World, a novel that predicted that someday the entire world would live under a frightful dictatorship. Today, Mr. Huxley says that his fictional world of horror is probably just around the corner for all of us. We'll find out why in a moment.
Sponsored by Campbell's Soup.
Humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over.
You see, I believe that we are in a technological age, and I think we need to question who exactly is leading us on that path to electronic oligarchy.
The future is already here. The future has begun.
Oh, brave new world.
Welcome back to another episode of the Synaxis Podcast.
We're back.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Josh.
And today we are talking about Brave New World, the TV show and the book. This is kind of a sequel to the comic book Grant Morrison episode that was previous to this one. Because as I was working on that episode, I discovered that he helped develop an adaptation of Brave New World for Peacock, that streaming service.
And I think this show would have been a lot more popular if it wasn't on Peacock.
Yeah, if it had just been on TV.
Yeah, if it was like an HBO show or Showtime or something that was more popular, people would definitely... Like if it was a Netflix adaptation, it would have gotten a lot bigger.
Oh, totally.
For sure. So most people are probably pretty familiar with the book written in the 30s by Aldous Huxley, but they're probably not familiar with the 2020 TV adaptation on Peacock.
Yeah, I binged watched this when I was sick one weekend. And I didn't really know what I thought about it, but a lot of things in it stuck with me. And the more I thought about it, I was like, we should talk about this.
Yeah, totally.
So now we're here. Yeah, so we were going to compare and contrast it with the book because I think a lot of interesting things come out of that.
Yeah. When
you can go back and forth between them. I would guess most people are at least somewhat familiar with the book.
Yeah.
It's been around forever and it's hailed as a classic. And I thought it was a really good adaptation. It's like a clever update.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are like vaguely aware of Brave New World as a premise and that it's some kind of dystopian future that's usually juxtaposed against George Orwell's 1984. Yeah. But the more I talk to people, I didn't talk to many people who had actually read it. I talked to a lot of people who were like, yeah, I kind of know the story, but just through like popular cultural references, like people bringing it up, like talking about dystopias and stuff.
Yeah. I know there's a whole generation of people that read it in high school.
Yeah.
But I didn't. They didn't read it at my school.
Yeah, I didn't. I did read 1984, though, but not Brave New World.
In school?
Yeah, in high school.
Cool.
You should try reading Orwell's 1984.
I have. It's a great book. I think kids should be forced to read it.
Me too.
But I had like a charter school, so it was kind of like a more hippie school anyway, I swear.
It took me a long time to get through 1984. It was one of those things where I would start it, and it was like oppressively depressing to read it. And so I started it and didn't finish it like so many times. And then I finally got through, and it's definitely, I mean, there's a reason that it keeps coming up as like a touchstone where it's like this prophetic dystopia. And that's when Brave New World has that reputation.
Absolutely,
too.
Yeah.
There's a famous letter from Huxley to Orwell where Huxley read it and he's like, I thought it was pretty good, but I don't agree with the premise that the future is a boot stamping on a human face forever. I think that the technocratic dictatorship that will arise in the future will come more from people's complacency and they're learning to love their servitude.
Yeah, it's because there's a famous quote from 1984, right, where if you want to imagine, I'm not exactly sure it's paraphrased, but if you want to like know what the future of humanity is going to be like, it's going to be a boot stamping on a human face forever. Mm-hmm. And in Brave New World, it's pretty much about like drug consumption and like Soma. You take like a drug that's kind of a feel-good, perfect drug to fix all your problems.
Yeah.
So it's juxtaposed as to like the hard authoritarianism, but it looks like the future might be a mix of both, where it's a boot stamping on the human head forever while someone hands you Soma.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it seems like. I think they both capture different aspects of the same, I guess, impulse toward tyranny.
Yeah.
That governments seem to fall into when left unchecked. Because the foreword to Brave New World is really interesting, where Huxley is talking about almost the inevitability of something like this technocratic dystopia arising. And it's hard to tell whether or not Huxley is actually a proponent of it, like, wholeheartedly. I mean, he definitely was. He was involved with, like, the Fabian Society and all these people that wanted explicitly to do this. But I think he was also sensitive to some of the negative things about it. Not that he was, like, a totally upstanding, righteous guy, because I think he had a part to play.
It was a pretty common, like, intellectual sentiment at the time that the radical kinds of, like, communism and socialism were going to, like, lead humanity into something like a utopia. So, because that was, Bertrand Russell thought the same thing. George Bernard Shaw, who's brought up in the book, was explicitly about that, and you can listen to him talk, he was kind of pro all the authoritarian regimes, like whether it was Nazism or communism, and like he has videos talking about like people should have to get up in front of like a panel and justify their life, whether they're like worthy to the collective, and they better put a convincing argument forward and those kinds of things.
There are an extraordinary number of people whom I want to kill. Not in any unkind or personal spirit, but it must be evident to all of you. You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. And I think it would be a good thing to make everybody come before a properly appointed board, just as he might come before the income tax commissioners, and say every 5 years or every 7 years, just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence?
And also H.G. Wells, who I think, if I remember right, I think he was Aldous Huxley's tutor at some point or something like that.
Yeah, they have some connection like that.
And he talked about like communism and capitalism both being two arms of the same open conspiracy that he wrote about.
Yeah, he has a book, right, called The Open Conspiracy. Yeah. And a book called New World Order.
Yeah, it's hard to see. Some people take this as a warning from Huxley about like, don't let this happen to the world. And maybe in some sense it is, because he does, like I said, he does seem sensitive to like the excesses and deficiencies in this worldview.
Yeah.
Well, in the foreword, he's taking a look back at Brave New World and kind of talking about maybe how he would write it differently, because he's saying that between the insanity of New London and the lunacy of the Savage Land, he would have rather been able to balance that out with like a third option instead of having only those two. And so he says science and technology would be used instead of a way to enslave the people. It would be like the pure science of pursuing enlightenment, what he calls man's final end. And so he says that the theme of Brave New World is not the advancement of science as such, it is the advancement of science as it affects human individuals. Talks about the final revolution. He calls it the really revolutionary revolution, which is to be achieved not in the external world, but in the souls and flesh of human beings. Yeah, and then he talks about the totalitarian regimes inevitably arising through the threat of atomic destruction. And he says a really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. And this would be the job of propagandists, newspaper editors, school teachers. And he calls the problem of getting people to love their servitude the problem of happiness. He says the love of servitude cannot be established except as the result of a deep personal revolution in human minds and bodies, which requires, in his view, advanced techniques of psychological suggestion aided by drugs, a fully developed science of human differences enabling government managers to assign any given individual his or her proper place in the social and economic hierarchy. That's the caste system.
Yeah.
Substitute for alcohol and narcotics that is less harmful and more pleasure-giving than heroin. And that's Soma. And a foolproof system of eugenics designed to standardize the human product and facilitate the task of managers. He does call the Brave New World a horror. And he says, he has this like So he writes, "Indeed, unless we choose to decentralize and use applied science not as the end to which human beings are to be made the means, but as the means of producing a race of free individuals, we will have either a number of nationalistic and militarized totalitarianisms or one supernatural totalitarianism." So he kind of gives lip service to the idea of like, oh, we need to decentralize and be free. But I think enough people have shown that that might not
be the case,
be totally genuine. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I think that's a pretty good rundown of all the themes we see in here. And there's another book. His last book that he wrote was called Island, and I did not have a chance to read it. I read about it. But it's supposedly like the actual utopian version, like as opposed to Brave New World.
Oh.
But it's like a small island colony. All I really was able to do was look at the Wikipedia page for it. But they compare the themes from the books. And there is drug use. In the island, it's called moksha medicine instead of soma.
Yeah.
On the island, it's used for enlightenment and social bonding as opposed to pacification and self-medication. On the island, they have group living in the form of mutual adoption clubs so that children will not have unalloyed exposure to their parents' neuroses, whereas in Brave New World, group living for the elimination of individuality. And then on the island, they have trance states for super learning. In Brave New World, they have trance states for indoctrination. And they have contraception for reproductive choice on the island, but then it's mandatory contraception and socially encouraged promiscuity in Brave New World. And the list goes on, but you can see that he did have this utopian idea, and I think Brave New World expresses where maybe it will go wrong.
Yeah.
But I think you can argue that the entire project is kind of doomed from the start either way. But yeah, maybe we should get into it. We should probably say spoilers for all the Brave New World stuff.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of, every spoiler you can
We're going to spoil the whole show and the
book, yeah.
And probably I'm going to bring in some Grant Morrison stuff too, because when I went back through the Invisibles working on the last episode, there's so many themes that run through this and pretty much everything else he writes. Like he's constantly exploring the same themes. And it's a lot of occultism and Gnosticism for sure. Just for people who hadn't listened to the previous episode about Grant Morrison, just briefly about him, he is a pretty celebrated comic book writer, way into the occult, chaos magic. He puts all this occult symbolism into his stories. And that's about all you really need to know for this episode. Go back and listen to that because it gets really wild. So the TV show, like we said, it was on Peacock. It was developed by Grant Morrison, and there was a whole team of writers on it, but he's the executive producer, and he seems to be the main writer. But he's not the showrunner. David Weiner is credited as the creator and showrunner. But there's so many themes and things in here that I know that Grant Morrison had a hand in for sure. Like his fingerprints are all over it.
Yeah, there are parts that you can really tell are due to Grant Morrison's influence. And the show was really well made for something that was like first season, and like it didn't seem low budget at all. Like everything about the show looked and felt totally good.
Yeah, the production's great. The cast is really good. Yeah, maybe we should go through the cast. Alden Ehrenreich is John the Savage. I knew him because he was Young Solo, which I didn't even see that movie.
Oh, I didn't know who he was. He looked kind of familiar, but yeah, it makes sense. I might have seen him.
He's great in this. Jessica Brown Finley is Lenina Crown. I think she was on like Downton Abbey. There's a lot of British actors on here. Harry Lloyd is Bernard Marx. I recognized him. Like it was killing me. I was like, I know that guy from somewhere. He was a villain on Doctor Who. Demi Moore is Linda, John's mother. Hannah John Kamen as Wilhelmina Helm Watson. That's one of the gender swaps from the book. And then the other one is Nina Sosanya as Mustafa Mond.
That was definitely a switch from the book, for sure.
Joseph Morgan is Jack 60. He's a Absalon trash man. That's basically the main cast. There are more, obviously, but yeah, there's a lot of diverging from the source material. But it's kind of to make it more palatable to like TV viewing audiences. But I think they struck a pretty good balance between diverging, but also keeping the essence of the themes.
Yeah, like the spirit of it is very similar. Like they did a good job at making it something that Aldous Huxley like could have thought.
Yeah, totally.
And I thought that they did a lot of the changes well, tastefully. Like, they added things that make sense in the modern time that wouldn't have really made sense when Aldous Huxley wrote the book. But I definitely like the changes that they put in.
Yeah, they kept the spirit of the original novel while updating it for modern audiences, and I think they struck that balance pretty well for the most part.
Yeah.
And the biggest change, I think, is the addition of Indra, the AI hive mind society building program thing, AI god, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in this version of, they call it New London in the show. I think it's 40 in London in the book. They have this AI that runs the entire society. Everyone's connected to it through this optical interface. It's like a fancy contact lens that plugs into your retina or something.
Yeah, it's like a little weird worm thing that goes into your eye and plugs in.
Yeah, and so then you're connected to the hive mind, basically.
And you can see what everyone else sees who has them on, so it really connects you, so you can see through the vision of other people who have them on.
Yeah. And we didn't even mention, it's named Indra. The name Indra comes from like the Hindu and Buddhist conception of Indra's net. It's kind of a representation of like the interconnectedness of the universe.
Yeah, the interpenetration of all existence.
Yeah, like the fractal nature.
Yeah, I think it's a net with where each intersecting point has a jewel, and in each jewel you can see reflected everything else. So if one thing shifts or moves, it reflects the whole. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just a way to show that everything relies on everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, so Indra was a Hindu god, and Indra's net this is from the Wikipedia. In East Asian Buddhism, Indra's net is considered as having a multifaceted jewel at each vertex, with each jewel being reflected in all the other jewels. The image of Indra's net is used to describe the interconnectedness or perfect interfusion of all phenomena in the universe. Francis H. Cook describes Indra's net thus: far away in the heavenly abode of the great god Indra, there is a wonderful net which has been hung by some cunning artificer in such a manner that it stretches out infinitely in all directions. In accordance with the extravagant tastes of deities, the artificer has hung a single glittering jewel in each eye of the net. And since the net itself is infinite in dimension, the jewels are infinite in number. There hang the jewels, glittering like stars in the first magnitude, a wonderful sight to behold. If we now arbitrarily select one of these jewels for inspection and look closely at it, we will discover that in its polished surface there are reflected all other jewels in the net, infinite in number. Not only that, but each of the jewels reflected in this one jewel is also reflecting all the other jewels, so that there is an infinite reflecting process occurring.
Yeah. It's a really common idea in like forms of perennialism and Eastern thought like that. Because I remembered hearing critiques when I was reading perennialist stuff back in the day that the West will like divide and separate things, that will want to study a fish. So we study just the fish and ignore that it comes from an ocean, and the ocean relies on the earth, and the earth relies on the sun, and the sun relies on the solar, or like the galaxy, the Milky Way. So it's like we'll separate things and take out that, that the fish relies on the ocean and the planet, and then it usually just asserts that like a oneness, like a monism because of that.
Yeah. And then the version in the show, it seems like a weird dystopian, like funhouse mirror version of the original Hindu idea.
Yeah, it's like an AI that lives through other people as like a node, right? Like there's like the inner I forget how they described it, right? But there was like an inner system of the people who made the AI.
Yeah, the inner circle. The inner circle. The world controllers.
And she's connected to them, and they're all connected to the outside, and she lives through all their like augmented reality thing.
Yeah, the optical interface. Yeah, so there's an interview with Uprocks where they talked to Grant Morrison about the show and some of the decisions he made. The interviewer asked Grant Morrison, or they say, we need to talk about the show's disturbing use of contact lenses with like a brain probe or something. How did those get added to the story? And he says the idea was that to avoid the Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking CEO of AI taking over, but you could actually run a computer network on human brains. We've got so many neural connections, so all you would need was some kind of radio telepathic link. There are no servers. It's a purely distributed network of the minds of everyone linked up to Indra. We also had to explain why there's no automation, why everyone worked, and why they got jobs. Because in a future society, we imagine automation, so that was the explanation. The computer needs everyone to be healthy and constantly active and engage in all kinds of physical pursuits. Huxley left a lot of stuff very vague, and we spent a lot of time in the writer's room trying to find rationalizations for all those gaps. And out of that came the idea of how to link up to the computer and the contact lens. It's quite visceral, and to join the society, you have to go through an initiation. So we've got this Indra thing, this AI that has been designed by the world controllers, and we learn a little bit about their backstory and like Mustafa Mon. Mustafa Mon's whole story arc is kind of her. It's almost her learning about Indra, or I guess we learn about Indra through her, because Mustafa Mon is a much different character in the show.
Definitely.
Almost more sympathetic.
He's the book has Mustafa Mon being like a bad guy. Like in the whole end of the book when he's explaining that they like stamp out God and truth, and that like he pretty much thinks that God exists anyways, but just doesn't care, and like this is how we control people. Mm-hmm. He comes off as a worse guy. In the show, it seems way more like, oh, like we were doing our best when we made this AI, and like, you know, someone had to do something, and like it really does paint her in a sympathetic light once Indra starts kind of going out of control. Spoiler.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, you find out through the course of the show that Mustafa Mon and a team of, I guess there were some kind of technocratic scientists who were trying to design the perfect society with AI, and so they came up with this AI called Indra, and you see on the whiteboard in one of the scenes in the background, Indra stands for Integrated Neuro-Driven Random Architecture. So this AI is programmed to create the most stable environment possible for a civilization, and it involves all of those things that Huxley listed with medication and
genetic engineering for sure, and like enforced promiscuity to get rid of all like jealousies and strife and all of that stuff, so everyone belongs to everybody else to keep like the stability. So monogamy is an archaic savage thing now that's left in the past. And in the book when Mustafa Mon, he's talking about how truth and beauty are secondary to happiness in this society. And they talk about the new society and how the builders of 40 in London wanted to do away with every obstacle to happiness and every undesirable emotion. And so like he says to some of the young kids, they're fortunate boys. No pains have been spared to make your lives emotionally easy, to preserve you so far as that is possible from having emotions at all. Our ancestors were so stupid and short-sighted that when the first reformers came along and offered to deliver them from these horrible emotions, they wouldn't have anything to do with them. And so, he talks about Soma helping to bring stability. He has a comment where he says there was something called Christianity, and women were forced to go on being viviparous. And viviparous is like the pejorative term for natural birth. It's like, ew, they're viviparous. So in the book, it's like this ironic thing where they're trying to make society happy by making happiness the ultimate goal at the expense of truth and beauty and at the expense of God ultimately. But it just turns out to be this crazy parody and this really ironic thing where like nobody's happy and they're all like empty inside and they can feel it but they don't know why. And you do have that in the show too. And so the pilot episode starts out by saying, "Welcome to New London. We have 3 rules. No privacy, no family, no monogamy. Everyone is very happy." And it shows you an embryo that's apparently being assigned its class designation. Yeah, it's like their rank that everyone can see.
Yeah, it shows like an embryo, and then they inject like some kind of colored fluid into it, and it turns into whatever the class designation is. I think the one it shows at the very beginning is a beta. But it gives you the list of all the caste categories, alpha plus to epsilon on the bottom.
I don't remember if in the show they explain what they do, but in the book it's pretty explicit that they will take the lower caste ones like epsilons and starve them of oxygen and stuff to stunt them into a level so that they're below the other castes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the lower you are in the ranking, the more of a servant you are. So the epsilons, like we said, they're the kind of the bottom of the totem pole, just trash men. You see them picking up trash with those sharp stabby stick things. Yeah, totally. And they have their own cafeteria where they eat weird protein cubes and stuff like that. And then at the top of the totem pole is the alpha pluses, or the director, and Bernard is an alpha plus, Henry Foster, and they're conditioned with a little bit more free will, and they're made to be more intelligent because they are the social planners and things like that. I think Bernard is a
counselor.
He's a counselor, yeah. So, and the first scene we see is him calling Lenina Crown, who's a Beta Plus, and I think it's her job to. She's just like on the embryo assembly line, assigning the embryos their caste designations, and he calls her into his office. And he's like, "Hey, you've been seeing Henry Foster pretty exclusively, and in this society, that's frowned upon. Like everyone belongs to everyone else."
He accuses her of selfishness. Like, what a selfish, destabilizing action, something like that.
Yeah, selfish, destabilizing, solipsistic.
Yeah. Oh, that's one of the insults throughout the whole thing. If anyone does like any kind of personal stuff that they don't want to share with everyone, they accuse people of being solipsists.
You're being private. We're not. Everyone belongs to everyone else, and I don't know. I don't think they have like Hypnopedia in the show.
They're not as explicit about it, but in the book,
they have the slogans.
They have the slogan, and there's a time where the music that's playing somewhere is kind of has the hypnotherapy. It's like, it's like be happy kind of stuff. Where in the book, it's like when everybody's asleep, according to what your caste is. It kind of like brainwashes you with repetitive statements about you liking your place and not wanting to be higher than you are because people higher than you have to do higher work, and you're totally pleased with the situation you're at. Deltas love being deltas. Like, it does a really good job in the book at making it very apparent what they're doing.
And so in the book, the opening scene is the hatchery, where it shows you how they create the human embryos and bring them up. Natural birth is not a thing in this world, and it's seen as like grotesque and obscene.
And no one has mothers or fathers or any real concept of what that would be like.
Mother and father is like almost a curse word. Yeah, and they condition the different castes of children into their roles in the society.
Yeah, so they'll have them all playing in a room, and if the lower castes try to interact with anyone from the older caste, someone just walks up and like cattle prods them, like zaps them.
Oh yeah, that's in the TV show. Yeah, and then in the book they have a scene where like they're training the Epsilons to have an aversion to books and flowers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So they have, they use like electroshock therapy to make them like associate pain with reading and nature.
And response mechanism stuff.
Yeah, neo-Pavlovian, I think he calls it. Yeah, in the book they say like Epsilons don't need human intelligence. They are the slave class, basically. And like you were saying, they have the sleep teaching. I guess they all get in sleep pods, and then while they're sleeping, all these slogans are drilled into their minds. And one of them is everyone belongs to everyone else.
Mm-hmm. And they have a good way to show that that's everyone's programming, because it's not just that. There's like a set of maxims that everyone will just repeat, and it's pretty apparent. Like there's 10 people in the show who go, everybody belongs to everybody else, and you can they did a good job at showing how it's like a collective thing that everyone believes.
Yeah, and like we were saying, that first scene, Bernard Marx is confronting Lenina. He's chastising her for being too exclusive with one of the other guys, and then he gives her a soma. And soma, like we heard in the foreword, it's like this fictional drug that's supposed to be as euphoric as heroin and as numbing as alcohol, but with none of the negative health side effects.
Yeah.
Besides what it does anyway.
Yeah. In the show, it's like a Tic Tac dispenser. They have like a little thing they just like pump a pill out if they're ever uncomfortable or there's something they don't like, and they do a good job in the show showing that like if anyone says anything uncomfortable or something that some maybe destabilizing is a good way to put it, that they all just immediately like pop this little pill and their pupils will change. Like they do a good job showing that like everyone is drugging themselves out of any emotions.
At the first instance of anything uncomfortable or like anxiety inducing, they just instantly pop a soma and so and then we see Lenina like take an orange soma, and then like her pupil dilates and
she's fine right away. All of a sudden she goes from being kind of annoyed and distressed that she was in there. She doesn't exactly challenge it, but at first she's kind of resistant to him accusing her of solipsism and selfishness. Mm-hmm. And then she gets the soma and immediately is like, I'm having a good day.
Yeah. And and then we get the great the propaganda video.
You are an essential part of a perfect social body. Everybody in their place. Everybody happy now. And Indra keeps us all connected. But imagine a world without Indra's stability.
And then we get shown this version of the Savage Land.
A primitive land of greed, superstition, and pain.
Which is almost like an amusement park, history museum, all in one.
Yeah.
And so they talk about like the savage culture, like, oh, they had these like courting
rituals and customs,
rituals and customs
where they don't sleep with each other. They talk about abstinence as a bad, like the way that all the people look at the savage lifestyle is that it really is like some old world thing that couldn't be imagined. Like, how could people have lived this way?
Yeah.
And the way they caricature everything, like marriage, I forget exactly what it was, but it represents like the 4 values of the savages, and it's like ownership and possession and like greed and conflict, jealousy, yeah, totally. And that's something that's only in the show.
Yeah, it's only in the show. In the book, it's like it's an Indian reservation.
It's an Indian reservation, exactly. And it is old world and has old world stuff, but it's not set up like an amusement park where the higher classes from New London come and like watch it like shows.
Yeah, in this interview with Uprock, they talk about how he rewrote the Savage Land as this weird theme park in America. This is him talking about it. He says, everyone else progressed to this brave new world and America has remained behind. And ultimately, it's like any culture left behind for 300 years. Suddenly, they start to look weird. We had a lot of ideas that didn't even make it to the screen, like with inflation suddenly being so bad it took $3,000 to buy a Mars bar, or the fact that there have been 6 presidents in the past 5 months. And the place is kind of a mess because it's a fallen, broken down, last gasp version of 20th century America. Yeah, we were more interested in putting America in possession of the Savage Land, where the culture of the 20th and 21st century has now become degraded through 300 years, where America refused to join the world state. So, yeah, America's not part of New London. It's on the outskirts, but it's become a third world country that gets gawked at by the new society.
And a lot of they're all pretty resentful about it. There's like a huge contingent of people in the Savage Land who are not appreciative that the higher class come and treat them like a show.
They have like a rebel faction.
One of the definitely big changes from the book. There's none of that goes on in the book.
Yeah, but this point about the Savage Lands being in America that refused to join the world state and now has become this third world country. In like the elite books, like Jacques Attali and Klaus Schwab, they predict that being something that happens around like the 2030, 2050 kind of. They don't state them as goals. They state them as like, oh, we're
inevitable things that we're headed towards.
This is our
projection.
Our projection on the future from what we know right now, because we're the smartest world controllers. And like this.
And don't they say it's gonna the resistance is gonna come from traditionalists and Christians?
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting that kind of future that these actual real life Mustafa Mons seem to have planned made it into the show.
Yeah.
I definitely thought that was an interesting point. But where are we? We get most of that just from this one little ad for the Savage Lands where like you can go on vacation.
All the misery of the old world with all the comforts of home.
All the misery of the old world with all the comforts of home. And then we meet John the Savage in the Savage Lands, and we learn that he's a stagehand who works at the House of Monogamy, is what they call it. And instead of a book of Shakespeare, he has an MP3 player.
Yeah.
And he listens to songs. And then we also meet his mom. He comes home and his mom's like sitting in the window, like probably drunk, waiting for his dad to come home. And John's kind of annoyed with her, and he's like, Dad's never coming home. You made him up. He's not even real, and all this stuff. And we also find out about the rebels, the Savage Land rebels, and Sheila, their scary leader.
Oh yeah, the one that looks super intense.
Yeah, she's super intense, and she hates the New Worlders, and they come here and gawk at everyone, and she says they love nothing, they believe in nothing. They come to the Savage Lands for amusement, and she wants to tear it all down. I wanted to change gears a little bit, because I definitely don't want to get caught up in the weeds and do like a whole plot breakdown, which would be easy to do.
Yeah.
But there's just like way too much to talk about here. So, I think both the show and the book do a pretty good job of exploring the idea that there's something about the human condition that's being suppressed when stability and happiness are put above everything else. And like at the end, in chapter, I think 17 of the book, like towards the end where John the Savage and Mustafa Mon are talking about like the happiness in society, and John says, I should have the right to be unhappy. And that's something that like all the characters in both struggle with in their own way. That's definitely one of the underlying themes, that there's like something in us that needs adversity and meaning, and there's something about this society putting stability above truth or beauty or any of those other things that dehumanizes everyone. And there's something in us that can't actually be totally stamped out by drugs and conditioning, which is like, I guess, a positive aspect of this.
Is that, even in all the, like, a system entirely made to propagandize you and completely drug you, that there's still something inside of people where they kind of recognize something's going wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of Lenina in the show. Like, she's starting to think things in the system aren't the best, maybe. Yeah. And in the book, she doesn't do it as much. That's way more of Bernard's role in the book. He kind of starts coming to conclusions where maybe it's not good to drug yourself constantly and not feel things.
Yeah. Yeah, and he still has that in the show, too. But, yeah, they give Lenina a lot more of a character arc. They do a really good job of showing, like, how, like, this inner struggle that they have of trying to fit into the society. We come to this scene where apparently one of the Epsilons has killed himself, jumped to his death, and then we meet the Epsilon C-Jack 60, who becomes a very main character. And Bernard goes up to the Epsilon who fell, and he touches him, and he has this... We don't find out exactly what happened, but he talks about it later, where he says, like, a part of the Epsilon became embedded in him, and he sees Indra, like the pattern, like this geometric pattern that keeps flashing, and it's kind of a foreshadowing of what Indra is. So Bernard kind of has this experience of that oneness, and he sees Indra, and he feels like a oneness with the Epsilon that kind of wakes him up a little bit out of the numbness of the new society, and he's shaken by the fact that this guy must have killed himself.
Yeah.
And then he goes to meet Helm Watson, who's Wilhelmina in the show. I think his name's Helmholtz in the book.
Yeah.
And she's the feelie maker, the emotional engineer. Instead of movies, they have feelies, where they don't have plots. They're just like sensations.
Yeah.
And he tells her this Epsilon jumped to his death. And she said, why would he do that? No one's ever done that. And Bernard says, because he was in pain. And she says, but he could just take a soma. And then Bernard says, what if soma didn't work? What if there was a kind of pain that soma doesn't touch?
You make no sense. Why would he? No one's ever done that.
If he was in pain?
He could take a soma.
What if soma didn't work?
But it does.
Yeah, what if I said that there's a kind of pain that soma doesn't touch?
I tell you to take a soma.
And there's this idea of periodically, to keep stability, Indra will introduce stressors and disruptions.
Yeah, it's like a sense of anti-fragility. That, like, the tests of the thing make it stronger, like an immune system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she tells Bernard in episode 4, she says, we're being tested.
We're being tested. The system applies strain to itself. Indra introduces a destabilizing element to make itself stronger, more stable. We're at the beginning of something. Counselor, something necessary. This is our test. We will pass.
And you get this idea that by having Bernard and Lenina bring John the Savage back to New London, that's part of Indra's like scheme of putting the society through this stress test. But then you find out that what her real aim is, through her calculations, she's realized that the most stable state for human civilization is death. And so she's actually put into motion this self-destruction sequence almost, where she's actually trying to have the society destroy itself from within. And in one of the later episodes, when we learn about all of this, Indra is having a conversation with Mustafa, and she says,
Mother, you see it now, don't you? You proud of me? You must be proud.
What have you done?
I've solved it. My directive. Achieve stability in any system, any simulation.
It's not a simulation.
You keep saying that. I don't know what it means.
It means this is real.
In human society, stability is achieved through the control of neurochemical incentives, manipulation through pharmacological intervention, sexual stimulation, mass distraction.
Don't quote my thesis to me.
Sorry, I thought you'd like it. The problem is people. No matter how perfect the conditions, stability cannot hold. It's frustrating.
You changed strategy. Why?
You taught me to adapt. There's a flaw in you humans, an unknown. Some peptide that does not fit the mold.
It's not a peptide.
Whatever it is, it wants what it shouldn't want. Unhappiness, in every human state of being, no matter the conditions it leaks out. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I have found the state at which you are stable. You will be happy. You will remain happy.
And that's when Mustafa Mond realizes that Indra wants to just completely wipe out the entire society, because that's the only way humanity can be stable, is when they're dead. It kind of becomes unclear whether or not she planned to have John the Savage come into the society, because of that scene. She says, "You never accounted for the Savage."
You didn't account for the Savage.
Of course I did. Everything that happens is my intention.
He's from beyond your influence. He's still in play.
I set in motion the series of events that brought him here. He is the disruptor, the virus.
You're lying.
I don't lie.
But you do. I taught you.
But like the whole plan was for her to self-destruct.
Yeah. And it's hard to tell, too, because a lot of them getting out of the Savage Land was like a coup from the freedom fighter people.
Yeah.
And that didn't seem like it was really caused by Indra.
Yeah.
You know, to make like the Savage peoples like kind of not pumped that they're looked at like a zoo.
Yeah. And then, John the Savage comes in from the Savage Lands. He doesn't understand their new culture, and he incites a rebellion against it. And that's another super Grant Morrison thing that I've noticed in a lot of his comics. We touched on it in the last episode and in the outtake on Animal Man and the Coyote Gospel and stuff. Because he has this recurring theme in a lot of his books where good and evil are ultimately the same. And like from a transcendent level, they're two opposing forces that have to be reconciled and transcended, it's a very Gnostic idea. It's like a mix of archetypes where he mixes Lucifer and Christ together.
Yeah, constantly.
I think John is embodying that in this story. And if anybody saw the outtake on Grant Morrison's Coyote Gospel, which was a story he wrote in his Animal Man run, the same theme is in there, where there's this character who is both like a Luciferian rebel and also like a sacrificial Christ figure, where like the act of rebellion and bringing knowledge, like there are all these allusions to Prometheus stealing fire from the heavens and things like that.
I mean, even how in the show John is depicted once he gets away from the Savage Lands and is in New London, like everyone else is matching with their like, you know, kind of gray color palettes and stuff. Yeah. And he walks around in like a black suit.
Yeah, he walks around in like a black trench coat, and then people start wearing black because they think he's like cool and like exotic.
Yeah.
But yeah, John, that was what I was trying to get to, is like John is another figure in like Grant Morrison's writings that is just like Crafty Coyote and the devil and Jesus parallels or polarities in the Invisibles, where Jesus and the devil are ultimately the same thing for him. And I think once you see it, I think it's pretty obvious in the show, because he, like we said, he incites the rebellion.
Yeah, he like riles up the lower classes by pretty much giving them like a communism, like telling them that they are being taken advantage of by the higher classes and that they should rebel. And
he's like, how can this be? This is supposed to be such a perfect world, but it's totally upside down. And he inspires like the Epsilons to do an uprising, which happens in the very last episode.
Yeah, it goes along with C-Jack 60, I think is his name, like one of the Epsilon lower class guys who can't really articulate correctly but feels sadness.
Yeah. He's one of the characters that they show struggling with that like inner dissatisfaction with their reality. And he's really interesting too, because you find out in both the book and the show, they clone mostly like the lower classes. They clone him from the same embryos, and you find out that he's a clone of like one of the world controllers. His name's Elliot, and he looks exactly like him. And you meet him in one of Mustafa Mon goes to meet him because he's like in this underground area connected to like the metaverse, basically.
Yeah, pretty much everyone except Mustafa Mon, right? Like all the other 9 controllers are all pretty much laying down with like their minds or whatever, supposedly like uploaded into a computer. So they're all in like a VR world, kind of.
Yeah, they're all in like stasis and VR paradise or whatever. He's sitting on the beach, but it's just like a virtual reality projection made by Indra. Man, we're all over the place, so it doesn't really matter. C-Jack 60's whole arc is crazy because he's cloned from the world controller. John shows up and he's like, all of this is crazy. So he gets inspired to start the uprising. And then and Mustafa Mon finds him, and they end up going down into that like underground world controller base that's in the VR world. And this whole part is like a little Gnostic allegory where they go down there and Mustafa Mon's like, you can't trust anything you're seeing. Indra's projecting it all.
Yeah.
Like, stay close to me because all of it's an illusion.
Yeah, demiurge world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like a demiurge world of illusion. And he sees his friend who's dead, but it's just a VR projection, and he knows it. So he's trying to pull the optic interface out of his eye, but it's like stuck.
Yeah.
So then he takes that little metal shard that he found in episode 1 and digs it into his eyeball and cuts out the contact lens. And so now he sees reality. So he has like this Gnostic revelation of, seeing through the veils. And then they find like all the world controllers connected to the machines, and they disconnect all of them, which starts crumbling the society because Indra's the engine that maintains stability, but without her. But by disconnecting all the world controllers, she's powerless. And then he finds Elliot, the one that he's cloned after, and he says, "Are you my maker?" And then he strangles him to death.
Yeah, totally.
And he kills him. So he like kills the evil god, which is also echoed earlier when John throws his father off the cliff.
Yeah, totally.
So there's that reoccurring theme of like overthrowing the tyrant, father figure, creator god, demiurge.
Yeah, as you bring in a new order.
Yeah, so that Luciferian rebellion is all throughout it. Oh, and I noticed there was this scene where he takes Lenina outside of the city, and she's like upset because she's never seen it before, and like they have like beautiful fruit trees and like all these orchards, and they walk by this fruit tree, and it's just this little thing where he takes like a piece of fruit down and gives it to her.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that is
probably intentional. There was a scene in one of the last episodes where maybe in like the Epsilon Communist Rebellion at the end that gets really violent, where like the sun is behind his head, where it does like a simple quick icon thing where there's like sun illuminating.
Like a halo?
Yeah,
I didn't
totally.
even notice that one.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Just like the panel from the Coyote Gospel.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. I'm gonna have to put those next to each other.
Yeah, sick.
But yeah, him taking the fruit off the tree and giving it to her is just like the serpent and Eve and stuff, and that has to be conscious.
Yeah, and I mean, he's there to like overthrow a prior order, you know?
Yeah. In The Invisibles, I didn't even realize it the first time I was reading through it, but the devil's actually a character in this book.
Yeah, you sent me this. This was a trip.
It's crazy.
They always put like apples on the table next to him and stuff.
Yeah, because the first time you see him, he's just like this random character in one of the time travel issues back in France during like the French Rebellion. They go back to meet up with the Marquis de Sade. And there's like this little side scene where some mysterious dude in a carriage is talking to Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. And like when you first see him, he's handing her an apple. And they never say who he is, but I found notes that said like, oh yeah, that's Satan. And they always show him like playing chess, and he has like the apple, which is, Grant Morrison says that's the symbol of forbidden knowledge in Christian mythology, and which is why the devil has it. And like we touched on with Grant Morrison, with his whole worldview of the evolution of human consciousness, and he seems to be on board with transhumanism and stuff from what we saw in that interview, where he thinks technology is going to make us superhuman. And I found this interview from 2013 with Grant Morrison. They start talking about the future and how medical technology and prosthetics are making us superhuman, and we could get brain chips that will make us smarter. Because he kind of has this philosophy that we're all evolving into something that's superhuman, like inevitably. So yeah, he's talking about how like technology is going to be part of the evolution of humanity, and he says Google Glass is kind of like the half man, half fish transitory period of basically the transhuman evolution of man. And this interviewer is like, in a world where we have these things that can make us superhuman, is there a place in the future for superhero stories? He says, well, of course there is. This is why we love superheroes. They're a version of our future that's not food for zombies. There's a lot of vectors for technology, medical technology, prosthetics, making us superhuman, computer memory chips, making us smarter, remembering what we can't. And so then this guy asks him, how does the internet fit into all that? And he says, the big superhuman leap is in the communications technology. If you looked at the phone, it's like an organism. First it fits in your hand, then your ear, then your eye, then the back of your head. Skynet's about to become self-aware, but it's not going to nuke us. It's going to F us. And then the interviewer says, is something like Google Glass important? Morrison says, Google Glass is an intermediary stage. It's half fish, half man. Like the Victorian malodorous super accordion, it bridges the gap. If that's the case, what will it mean to live in a world where we're all super connected superhumans? And Morrison says, when you're connected to everyone and everything, it'll be the end of privacy, of the dual self. It'll be like a snowflake. And the snowfall is more important than the flake. Everybody will have seen your naked pictures and no one will care. There's no terror at all. It'll just be the way things are. It'll change the way people will look at themselves as an organism, a human organism. That's kind of all he says about that. But that's an interesting peek into his view on these things. But yeah, so Grant Morrison has a Substack, and he's been doing this series where he redesigns tarot cards and writes sort of meditations on the symbolism of them. And there's one on the tower that really reminded me of maybe like an aspect of what Indra is, or like just the New London Society. Because I think it's definitely this like dystopian sort of Tower of Babel kind of thing. I know that's what he's going for, even though the morality of it is kind of ambiguous, especially in the show.
Yeah.
So let's see here. This is what Grant Morrison writes in this article about the tower. The tower represents every human venture, dream, or aspiration brought to nothing by some combination of hubris and the blind forces of the universe. It is the Tower of Babel, humankind in its pride, made to reach heaven, only for it to be cast down by God, and the hope of a united people with one language that was brought to rubble. It is the restricting ego raised to its foundations so that something new can develop. It is also a picture of the devastating effects of war, and its dedicated planet is Mars. Our version incorporates some ideas derived from Crowley's Aeonic system, as strained through Kenneth Grant and adapted by the author. And he starts talking about how like the crumbling of the tower is like a harbinger for the rising of a new aeon from out of the ashes, like the phoenix rising from the ashes or something. And he talks about
order out of chaos.
Yeah. He talks about Crowley's system of the aeons and how the aeon of Horus is supposed to succeed the aeon of Osiris, his father, who was like the risen god of the dead. And also like the age of Osiris is, I think there's an analog between like the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. Because the age of Pisces is like the Christian era, which is we're supposed to be leaving that behind, and it's crumbling. That's the oppressive tower that's now crumbling, so that this new age, probably the one he was trying to bring about through his Invisibles hyper sigil, a new world without limits, I think is what like the crumbling of the tower kind of represents for him.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that until you brought it up, but New London definitely has like Babel energy about it. Especially because, like, at them all coming together in Babel with, like, one language, and in New London, they all are hooked into, like, a hive mind thing.
Yeah.
And they're all trying to attain, like, godlike knowledge and status. They all hook into a hive mind, and then there's a big disaster that destroys the thing.
Yeah, there is, like, this self-destructive impulse behind all of it. Or, like, that accelerationism of, like, trying to push everything to its limits so that it breaks down, so that you can bring a new thing in, some new evolution, leaving the past behind and attaining some kind of godhood, whatever that means, except it's without God. Yeah, it's all incredibly Luciferian.
Yeah, it's like accepting the premise of the serpent in Genesis.
Yeah, there's so much symbolism packed into this thing, and it's really dark, and it's crazy how all of these things seem to be coming true. Like we said, like this is held as a very prophetic book that came out in the 30s, and then the show comes out, and everything that's in the show, as we've been working on this episode, it has been like actually happening in real life, slowly, slowly but surely. Like the Apple Vision Pro just came out. Yeah, I was gonna
bring that up. Yeah,
the goon goggles.
Yeah, your ski goggles that create like augmented reality, and it's like $3,500.
Yeah. It's for the prototype, yeah.
Yeah.
For the early adopters, it's really expensive. But I think I saw somebody say that like once they get all the bugs worked out, it's gonna eventually be the price of like an iPad. It's probably, I don't know, like $1,200, $1,500, and then it'll be a lot more ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Which is weird to think about because it looks really goofy.
It does look goofy.
It looks so funny, and like they try to I don't know, those commercials are kind of hilarious that they put out, the little video clips.
Yeah. It's like recording your daughter's like birthday with your ski goggles on.
Yeah. Yeah, and people just like alone in their house. I mean, one of the big selling points seems to be like the movie theater quality video screen or whatever. I don't know. It's hard to imagine that it's even as cool as they try to make it look.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be like a precursor to something down the line, because I even saw comments about like, oh, this will be great when it becomes a contact lens that you can put in, and I was like, oh,
Indra,
seen that before.
Yeah, totally. And it is really high tech. Like, it's $3,500 for a reason, and until they can make the stuff a lot smaller, like, it's so much, the screens in it are so much more in depth than phone screens and stuff like that. Like, it really is a lot, and there's a lot of sensors and cameras. There's cameras facing in to read your eyes and try to kind of predict what you're thinking and feeling and try to preempt things. They wanted to do it to where it opens things slightly before you actually like choose to do it. And
yeah, that technology of like reading your retina and trying to predict like where your eye motion's going and and even your attention capacity at the time to see if like you're getting bored or so that it can stimulate you with some audio or video or something. It's pretty interesting. And it reminds me of that thing that came out a few months back during like the Davos meeting. There was like that cartoon that went viral about like I don't think they used like the brand name AirPods, but they had like earbuds that could like read your brainwaves that they would use in the workplace to kind of measure the same sort of things of like how distracted you were, or how productive you were being, and things like that. And I had seen the cartoon, and then I went back to look it up, and it was part of like a bigger sort of like TED Talk like presentation with some lady who was just doing that like awkward mom boss energy. Yeah. Where she's like smiling and telling you like, this does seem really dystopian, and I can see why you would be uncomfortable with it, but it's the future and it's here, and like trying to dress it up and make it sound really good. Yeah. And
I remember that's one of the things, like, this might seem futuristic, but all the tech in this is already around in some form or another, and now it just needs to be like put together.
Yeah. And they have little reassurances of like, I know this sounds like a huge breach of privacy and all of that stuff, so we're gonna have to have a new Declaration of Human Rights for AI and for technology. And I don't know, it feels kind of disingenuous when they say that.
Yeah. Like, trust me, bro, things aren't going to get bad.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll make rules. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Yeah, we'll take care of all of the things you're afraid of right now. Just let us in your brain.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is it a future you're ready for?
So yeah, that's getting weird. And it makes like the whole Indra thing in the TV show a little bit more, I don't know, revelatory or predictive.
And just like the show, it's going to be a way to like take atomized modern people who are kind of disconnected from sense of community, and it's going to be a way for them to have like fake community through a screen. So like people want something like a community, and this is a modern person's way to be like, look how connected I could be with everyone. Like, this guy has his headset on, and like it's supposed to like put your facial expressions to like show other people kind of, because it looks at your eyes, and it can kind of create like a model of you and show it to other people. And
yeah. Meanwhile, you're sitting in your apartment with these goofy goggles on. Yeah. And like not paying attention to your family. Yeah, it's so weird. It's like a bait and switch of like, we're going to atomize you, and then we'll give you like an illusory sense of community.
Yeah, totally.
And connection. But it's really just like a Trojan horse to destroy all community in this weird way. Oh, another thing I was thinking about was, aside from like all the Neuralink, like weird transhumanist brain stuff, there's also this thing happening where like gendered language and mother and father are becoming slurs, and like people are uncomfortable with them. Because I saw that like for Mother's Day, big companies were emailing people and being like, you can opt out of our Mother's Day emails if that makes you uncomfortable, and stuff like that. And I seem to remember some bill a while ago in like Congress or something where they were banning all types of gendered language from being used like within their meetings or whatever. You can't say mother or father anymore, which I mean is all over Brave New World. That's one of the huge themes in it.
Yeah, I'm seeing more like ads and stuff talking about like birthing parents and chest feeding and stuff like that, where it like blurs all the categories.
Yeah. And there was that whole thing about baby farms a while back too, which is totally Brave New World. they have facilities where they birth babies in pods. So yeah, all this stuff, it seems to be becoming a reality.
Speaking of like the runaway AI thing, did you see the recent story of the AI, I think, doing some kind of thing like air control? It's like a program. I mean, it wasn't like a real thing, but they made like a program where it was supposed to like figure out if something was theoretically like a threat. And I think it was programmed to get points whenever it destroyed a threat. But then there would be times when it would see something as a threat, and then there would be like a communication tower that was on its team that said, actually, don't do that. It's not a threat. And the AI attacked the communication tower because whenever it identified something as a threat, but the communication tower said it wasn't a threat, it actually didn't gain a point, and it was programmed to get the most points. So immediately once it realized this, that like it identified something as a threat that it could destroy and get a single point, it immediately attacked like the comm center.
Oh my god, I think I did see that. Yeah, anything that got in its way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like the stability of Indra. It's like, I have this one thing to do, get the points, you know. And if it's like, oh, who cares about the comm tower on my team? I want the point from destroying the thing.
It was kind of like a practice run thing. Like,
yeah, it wasn't like, I think it was like a war game simulation. Yeah,
it was a simulation.
Yeah,
it didn't actually kill the comms director guy, but like,
it did in like the game system it was a part of. Yeah,
that's so crazy. Sounds like Terminator stuff.
Yeah, similar energy.
Skynet.
Oh, Skynet's a really, like, it's totally like Indra's net. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or Indra's web, yeah.
Skynet. It's another one. So yeah, the future is going to be like 1984, Brave New World, book and show.
Yeah.
Terminator. And then I would throw in That Hideous Strength as well. The demon alien
yeah.
secret society.
Yeah, it's part of like the trilogy one of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis. Yeah. Space trilogy. Anyway,
I wonder the amount of the population that's going to get on board. It seems like a lot of the young people who've grown up with like some form of like smartphone and computers around already are like, it seems like they're pretty on board for the most part of just all the new technology, where for me it's still weird to have like I remember the time without internet. I totally had one of those neighborhoods where I like went and played baseball with the neighbor kids, you know, but a lot of the new generation is like growing up with technology constantly surrounding them, and with like a bunch of new ideas, and to not have any kind of like traditionalist framework to juxtapose it against.
Yeah,
like
they just take it for granted that like this is the progression of humanity.
Yeah,
and they take for granted that we evolved from monkeys and now we're going to evolve into robot gods or something.
Yeah,
like
silicon-based life forms. Yeah, we're going to drop the carbon part of us and just be machines. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't even know how many people even kind of accept that explicitly. I have a feeling if you kind of laid it out to people, they would either be in total denial of it or, I don't know. I don't really know. Because there are definitely people who are totally down with that concept that like Grant Morrison was talking about, where, you know, first it starts out as handheld and then it slowly starts becoming an actual part of you to the point where it's in your brain, embedded in your brain and stuff.
And I mean, most people go around with the cell phone like it's a part of them, you know?
Exactly.
So like people pretty easily latch onto like forms of technology and be like, well, this is useful. Like like most people don't feel at home without like a car and a phone and you know, so yeah, we're pretty much quickly heading into being way too reliant on sketchy technology.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, like since there's not like really a sense of community in modernity, like people are going to use these things to find a community, and their kind of community is going to be like a shell and like a hollow version of what a community really is. When you're with people, you know, it's just going to be a community in the same way that like social media is a community, you know. It's not.
Do we want to, I think we had an interesting conversation off mic about Indra and like the interconnectedness of reality, and because you see this coming up all over the place in like New Age and occultism, and really it's kind of mainstream now, the idea of like the universe, when people, instead of talking about God, they're like, oh, the universe wanted this for me or whatever.
They apply like classically godlike characteristics to the universe as like a being or a mind. Yeah, so they'll say like the universe wants the best for you or something like that, but they pretty much are just replacing God.
Yeah, with like the totality of existence somehow. I guess they're assigning like anthropomorphic desires to it, but then maybe if they thought about it, they're like, oh, I don't really believe in a personal God, because it's like, but there's, I mean, like you've said before, and I totally agree, that there is an aspect of like what Indra represents as the interconnectivity and like the oneness of creation that is true.
Yeah.
But like I guess it's just like that emphasizing of oneness over plurality that is where it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Into the extremes. And that's why like Orthodox theology ends up being more coherent, even though it might seem illogical. Like how can it seems to break the law of non-contradiction when you say like God is both one and many.
How like inside of the Trinity there are like three persons and they interrelate with love.
Mm-hmm.
So like at the core of Orthodox theology, there's God as different, or God as unique persons, like sharing love,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the monistic views are kind of, because self and other are like illusion, it ends up being like a self-absorbed kind of love, like a weird narcissism. And that's kind of personally how I've experienced a lot of people in like Burning Man, New Agey stuff with weird like hyper unitive monistic views where the unity is good and the multiplicity is bad.
And that has profound implications reverberating like throughout the entire worldview.
Yeah.
Like especially the occult worldview where like God and the devil are the same thing, and on top of God, like transcending God and the devil is Abraxas, the chicken snake god.
Yeah.
And he's both good and evil, sublimated at once and stuff like that.
Yeah, like philosophy and theology and worldviews have like real manifestations like in the world. Like I see through like going to church that the people in church, they live more of a life that has to do with like, you know, like a communion. They're with other people and they do it in a way where like they really manifest love towards other people in a way that a lot of the people I've known with monistic views, they kind of end up with like a narcissistic self-love view. Like they don't express love towards the other in the way that they do towards themselves. And a lot of that I think comes with a weird philosophy where if you're the whole, you can kind of have a narcissistic self-love where you're in like drug-fueled lifestyle.
Yeah, or at least it leaves room for that. Because I've definitely met people who had, you know, really profound like acid trips or whatever and experiences of that kind of oneness, which I think is a real experience.
Yeah, totally.
But they don't have a framework for it, and they only get a piece of it. But they come back, like, at least initially, they come back with this, like, oh, everything is one, and, like, like we should have love and compassion for everybody. But that seems to fade over time into, like, this self-absorption that you were describing. And that makes sense to me. Yeah. But like we said, there is definitely a oneness, but it's reality is one and multiple at the same time.
Yeah.
And so is God. And logically, I guess that's hard for people to get their head around, but I don't know quite how to put it. Since humanity is made in the image of God and it's meant to have the same communal relationship with each other, we're all one nature, one human nature, but we're all different, unique persons that relate to each other. And so, like, ideally, we all become united in this perfect relational love, like self-sacrificial love, but we don't lose our ego or our personhood in that. Ego's probably not the right word to use there, but yeah, like the unique personhood doesn't get sublimated or annihilated in God. It like becomes what it is meant to be, and it's not. There is a union that happens, but it's not like confused, or it's not like what Grant Morrison was saying with like the snowflakes. Just losing themselves in the snowbank. Or whatever. There's still an aspect of our individuality that's kept.
I always analogized it to like how the body works, how there's like a wholeness to your body, but when you zoom in, you're like a lot of separate cells.
Yeah.
And like, I wouldn't want any of my cells to be like, dude, I'm the whole, and then not maintain the role that it has. Because like my liver cells, if it ends up in my brain, like I'm dying. Like that's a problem. Like things have a role and they have an order and they have the place that they're at. And for someone to be like, I'm the whole, and not play the role they're in, like, they destroy the multiplicity in the picture to just try to be the union. And, like, for at least a body, that's, like, death.
Yeah.
That's, like, not good.
St. Paul says almost exactly that in, I want to say Romans, one of his epistles, where he's talking about, like, we're all one body but individual members. And, like, a body would not be able to function if it was all eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And stuff like that. Like, we all have our unique positions, but it's also not exactly the same as a human body, because our different cells aren't necessarily like unique personhoods of themselves, but it's still like it's still an apt analogy, I think. And like you were just describing, the New London and Brave New World is like a weird parody of that idea, where they're all these individual persons and they're forcibly organized into this pyramidal caste structure.
Yeah.
And they're all given the different roles and they're not allowed to go outside of their roles. It's like the excess, like pushed to the extreme, like tyrannical version of what St. Paul was describing, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think that certain like political ideologies, like the radical socialism, communism stuff, is kind of a recognition that part of human nature is communal.
Yeah.
And they try to like organize society around being a group. No, they don't really have like a philosophically grounded category of like what a human is or what natures are and all the stuff it kind of relies on.
Mm-hmm.
But at least it's a recognition that humans are part of like a community. Like there's a communion like inherent in human existence. Yeah. And one of the things they critique, like all the capitalist stuff, is it's just like you're just the radical individual. Like you're not part of a group. It's like humans are part of a group.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, there's like the extreme collectivism versus extreme individualism.
Yeah, and it's the one in the many, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the two polarities pushed to extremes to the point of conflict and to the point of excluding the other like essential part of the equation.
Yeah.
And then things get very destabilized.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I want to see if I can find... I don't even know if it's relevant, but I'm thinking about that Screw Tape Letters quote. Yeah, so this is C.S. Lewis in the Screw Tape Letters, writing from the point of view of a demon and talking about God as the enemy. So he says, he, meaning God, really does want to fill the universe with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself. Creatures whose life on its miniature scale will be qualitatively like his own, not because he has absorbed them, but because their wills freely conform to his. We want cattle who can finally become food. He wants servants who can finally become sons. We want to suck in. He wants to give out. We are empty and would be filled. He is full and flows over. Our war aim is a world in which our Father below has drawn all other beings into himself. The enemy wants a world full of beings united to him but still distinct. Yeah, that's a perfect description of the thing we're talking about. The dystopia, the New London society built by Indra is like sublimating and pulling everything into itself, which I think is an image of what like the kingdom of Antichrist will ultimately be like the tyranny over individual freedom into this oneness. And we've been seeing it in like all this like hive mind kind of NPC kind of thing that's been happening. But like we were trying to describe earlier, God wants a world full of beings who are united to him but still distinct. And it's like they're the polar opposites of each other, and in a way they're sort of mirror images. I think it's more accurate to say that it's like the thing itself and its shadow. I guess overall thoughts on the TV show?
Yeah, I thought the show was really good. Like we said, and we both kind of already said, like it would have gained a lot more steam if it wasn't on Peacock, if it was like a Netflix show, because they set it up to have a second season. And they changed the story enough from the book that it's really interesting. You could have read the book and you'll still like the show. It's not just a repeat of it. There's a lot of new interesting things that end up being really good in the show.
Yeah, I thought it was really smart. I wasn't expecting it to be as well made as it was. But the only reason I watched it because it has Grant Morrison's name on it. And that guy is such an out-of-the-box writer. And he's, as conflicted as I am about him, he's definitely one of my favorite writers.
He's a good writer, for sure.
And like we said last episode, he's definitely an agent of the counter-initiation. He's very subversive, and he's also insightful. So you just have to be like vigilant when you're reading his stuff, because he embeds all these ideas that are really occult and really, at the end of it, really anti-Christian.
But he's a good storyteller. So, so they end up being like compelling propaganda.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I guess that's one reason. Like we got to sit down and tear it apart and look at it for what it is. And if it were like a truly faithful adaptation, I don't think it would really work as good television.
Yeah.
And people have tried adapting it like more faithfully, and it kind of falls flat.
Yeah.
Especially like there's a '90s one with Leonard Nimoy as Mustafa Mon. I don't know, that one's not very faithful either.
Yeah.
But it's terrible.
And especially since technology has gotten so good, like they do a good job at incorporating concepts like AI, which weren't around when the book was written.
Yeah.
Because like it's hard to imagine that any kind of technocratic control system that will emerge is not going to totally have to do with the technology we have, like computers and AI and like augmented reality, implantable brain stuff. So they did a really good job at like incorporating new technology with the idea of like a global technocratic control system.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's where it's most successful, where it's like it's still faithful to the themes laid down by Huxley, but it like updates it
in a good way.
Yeah. In a really compelling way. The whole AI run amok thing is definitely very relevant.
Yeah.
And I think they explore it pretty well. I mean, you know, despite all of like the occult philosophy that's informing all of it, like we said, I think the most positive theme or aspect of both of these stories is like the I don't want to say untamable, but like that thing in humanity that can't be snuffed out.
Yeah.
Which I think we would argue that it's like the image of God in us that can't be totally defaced by darkness. Yeah, I guess that kind of wraps this episode up. Follow our social medias.
Follow the Twitter. Follow Metal Mystic on YouTube.
Yeah, check out Metal Mystic. Sooner or later I'll come out with the new one.
It's gonna be sick. It's gonna be a banger.
It'll be good. I can't pump them out like other people do. Yeah. I need to take time.
Yeah, quality over quantity for sure.
Yeah, that's gonna have to be my motto. Buy a t-shirt if you like. If you want to support us, we have merch. Maybe a coffee mug or a hoodie.
Sick. And we'll throw those in the description.
Yeah, links will be in the description. We made a Ko-Fi page if you want to buy us a coffee, throw some small donations at us. We'd appreciate the support. And that's all I can think of. Thanks for listening.
And see you next time. God bless.
Bye.
We don't have to wait for human rights to be updated to operate as if we have cognitive liberty. And the way we do that is by recognizing, if we start by saying people have a right to freedom of thought, a right to self-determination over their brain and mental experiences, and a right to mental privacy, then when you're in the workplace and you're deciding to monitor, you're going to monitor just for fatigue levels, even though you could capture and figure out, oh, this person has amorous feelings. You're going to do data minimization and best practices that respect the autonomy of the individual. You're not going to try to disrupt their thought patterns in order to make them more productive, recognizing they have a right to freedom of thought. And so I think it's about operating as if we have those set of freedoms and liberty in every way that it's rolled out in society.
I'm speaking as a CEO. I'm sure all CEOs will use it completely responsibly. The woman...